This week we move slightly outside of LaFollette into Jacksboro, where a life of poor decisions came to a breaking point with the ultimate bad choice: the Outlaws' reward. The 1930s were notorious for desperate outlaws who were seen as folk heroes. They traveled the countryside robbing banks and seemingly frustrating authorities at every turn, Bonnie and Clyde being perhaps the most iconic of these anti-heroes. During the 1930s, banks were not favorably viewed. The Depression was in full swing, and banks were foreclosing on farms and homes at a record pace. Stories of these gangsters sticking it to banks became headline news, and people generally weren't on the side of the banks. Why? If a banker got shot, more the better, many believed. Henry Burton would have grown up during this time frame, and those outlaws would have been his heroes growing up. A young man born in 1923 in southeastern Kentucky, Burton moved to Tennessee and quickly got to work on his life of crime. By the time he was 18, Burton had been married, divorced, and had gotten a 2-year prison sentence at Brushy Mountain, gotten out of jail, and got another 5-year sentence for another felony charge. Even with those 2 felonies and prison sentences, Burton, at 23, was a free man in January of 1947. He was newly married, his second marriage, and was living in San Diego, California. Apparently having issues with alcohol, Burton decided to return home to stay with his mother in Corbin while his wife remained on the West Coast. It seems, however, on his return, his outlaw itch wasn't scratched, and this time it turned violent. On January 15, 1947, Henry Burton was on a bus heading from Nashville to Knoxville. He was sitting beside a woman from New York, 20-year-old Elizabeth Red Moffett. In his written confession, Burton told authorities what happened over the remainder of January 15th into the early morning hours of January 16th. He and Moffett got off the bus in Knoxville in the evening and hailed a cab. There, they went to a restaurant and ate lunch and had, according to Burton, 5 bottles of beer each, along with whiskey and gin. During the dinner, the pair, Burton wrote, began discussing robbing a bank they had passed earlier about 30 miles east of Nashville. Burton told Moffett he needed someone in the car to keep the motor running while he went in and robbed the place. They left the club in Knoxville at 8:30. Burton said he asked the driver if he knew a good place to stay and claimed the driver told him there were good places to stay in Lake City or Jacksboro. This statement makes little sense. A Knoxville cab driver suggesting 2 small towns 30 to 50 miles north of Knoxville as nice places to stay at 8:30 p.m. in mid-January just doesn't add up. It's possible Burton made that up entirely to try to mitigate some of the potential charges he was to later face. For her part, Elizabeth Moffett told a similar story to Burton's up to the events that took place in the restaurant. She was trying to get back to New York from Nashville, but didn't have quite enough money for a bus ticket. Henry Burton paid for her ticket, and they sat together on the bus. She said they did go to dinner and had about 5 beers each. She stated they didn't have any whiskey or gin, however. The waitress from the establishment also said she served neither of the pair anything but beer. Here we speculate that rather than suggest a room in faraway Jacksboro, Hauser, the cab driver, was likely held at gunpoint by Burton and ordered to drive north towards Kentucky. By claiming Hauser had suggested Jacksboro, Burton was able to avoid kidnapping charges, an aggravating factor that would have almost guaranteed a trip to the electric chair. Hauser also made up the liquor claims and would later claim he was blacked out drunk during the events of the evening. As the cab traveled north, Burton claimed in his confession letter that he removed the gun from his bag and shot the rear window out of the car. The cab stopped and he got in the front seat with Hauser. He explained to Hauser that they were going to need his cab to pull their bank job and ordered him out. He claimed Hauser said he had also been in trouble and would be willing to take them to rob the bank himself or anywhere else they wanted to go. They drove on ahead and were 1 mile from Jacksboro when the cab stopped again. Burton said he and Hauser stepped out of the car, and Red got out and was standing a few feet behind the car. At that point, Burton says he fired 1 shot and that Hauser slumped. He then said, seeing what he had already done, he unloaded the entire .45 caliber handgun into Hauser. The crime scene and autopsy suggests that Hauser was actually executed by Burton. One of the shots traveled through Hauser's palm and exited the rear of his hand, suggesting Hauser was shot with his hands up. Burton dragged Hauser out of the road, into the ditch, and left him there. In his own words, Burton writes, "I killed the cab driver and don't expect anything but the electric chair. I don't know why I did it. I just started shooting." Moffett got back into the vehicle. She would later claim out of fear that she was looking to give Burton the slip all evening. They continued to travel on into Kentucky, stopping at Corbin to pick up luggage. He attempted to buy gasoline, but Burton couldn't get the gas lid off, so he shot it off, bought gas and some food, and drove on to Glasgow, Kentucky, where they ran out of gas. Here, Burton decided to rob a service station and shot the attendant during the robbery. Another working attendant smashed a bottle over his head, and Burton said he woke up in police custody. Elizabeth Moffett managed to slip away from Burton, somewhere in Kentucky. She looped back to Nashville, got on a bus back to Knoxville, then from there she traveled to Virginia. She was arrested there as she attempted to board a bus to New York. Both Burton and Moffett were brought to Jacksboro and placed into the custody of legendary Sheriff Rose Kitts. They were charged with murder and ordered held without bail as they awaited trial. It was during this time that Burton wrote his confession. He would later try to recant it during trial, however. He did try to clear Moffett in his written confession, claiming she had no idea he was going to suddenly murder Hauser, and that she had no role in any of the other crimes he had committed. During his trial, Hauser's mother testified that he had had a skull fracture as a child and had started breaking the law soon after. She said it had been recommended he be sent away, but she never had the heart to do it. He then tried to join the army to fight in the war, but was declared unfit, and that drove him to further crime. It should be noted, however, that when the war began when he was in Brushy Mountain State Penitentiary. Burton's written confession was too much for his defense to overcome. He was found guilty by a jury of 12 men and sentenced to 99 years in Brushy Mountain. The jury found Elizabeth Red Moffett not guilty of accessory to murder, and she was set free. In addition to his letter of confession, Burton wrote letters to his wife in California, one after his arrest and one after his conviction. His first letter reads in part, "My darling wife, I love you. It pains me to have to write you under these circumstances. In case you haven't already heard, I'm in jail for murder. God, if I had known something like this would have happened to me when I kissed you goodbye, it would have never been goodbye. I worship you and always will. It seems fate will be between us from now on. I hate that you have to suffer for my crimes. In my heart, I will never know happiness again. Without you, life isn't worth living. Honey, to keep you from having to live with the embarrassment of being married to a criminal, please try at once to get a divorce, because I may be sentenced to death for this. It is a horrible thing I have done, but I have made peace with God and am not afraid to die. Baby, please don't ever touch a drop of whiskey or beer. For if I hadn't been drinking, I would never have went home to Mother and would never have been in this serious trouble today. Write my mother and tell her what I've told you. This will almost kill her too. I will love you and be thinking of you till the end of time. Remember our song? I feel my time here on earth is short. Even if I don't have to die for this, prison and being away from you will break my heart and kill me. Please write me soon. I'll be tried on the 17th. God alone knows my fate after that. Baby, please write and send me a large picture of yourself. Please. All my love belongs to you till the end. Your Buck. After his conviction, Burton wrote, in part, the following to his wife shortly after he left his cell for the last visit before his pending transfer to Brushy Mountain. To my wife, my precious baby, I love you. It is now 8:30 p.m. and the end is near. Darling, I'll be with you no more so in death than in my life. Baby, I am sorry you've had to suffer for my mistakes. I know God has already forgiven me for taking my life. Even though I never intended, nor know why the man was killed, I do know that I was not insane. I was too much under the influence of alcohol to know what I was doing. For several days, I couldn't remember what I'd done until I sobered up, but no one would believe me. Baby, as these are my last words to you, read them when the going gets hard. Darling wife, even though my life will soon be over, I will always be near you. A love like ours will last even in death. I have been hurt several times by seeing your heart broken at my hands. Honey, I can't write much more. It only makes the thought hurt more. Don't think of my death as suicide. I'm not crazy, nor do I think anyone who takes their life is. I can see peace from all worldly harm. You are the most wonderful person and dearest wife ever. Smile for me, baby. Did anyone ever tell you you're just plain beautiful, and I think you're kind of swell? Precious baby, it isn't goodbye, just good night. I'll be loving you until the end of time. All mine is yours. Yours, Bucky. When breakfast came around the next morning, jailer Jimmy Jones found Henry Burton hanged by his neck in his cell. Jones noted that Burton's neck was not broken. He'd strangled to death. In his pocket were the letter to his wife and press clippings from his arrest and trials. In 23 years of life, Henry Burton committed a multitude of serious crimes. Did a stint in prison, murdered a man, shot another, plotted a bank robbery with a woman named Red while on a multi-state crime spree with her, and ultimately, his trial wasn't even the biggest of the day here in Campbell County, for he was tried the same day as Biddy Johnson of Hatchet House fame. In the end, Johnson had something else in common with outlaws from his youth. They all ended up dead or in prison as well. That, friends, is usually the outlaw's reward. And that's how history recorded it in the Outlaw's Reward. I'm District Attorney General Jared Effler for the Volunteers Times series, Lawless, LaFollette.